In a few moments, we'll start the presentation. While you are settling in, say hi in the chat box. We would love to hear where everyone is joining us from. As WheatonArts celebrates its 50th anniversary this year, we want to welcome you to our first ever virtual Eco Week. I want to take this opportunity to remind everyone that this week-long program is in partnership with the Cumberland County Improvement Authority. This virtual event features visits with local artists with live and pre-recorded programming from environmentally minded organizations and a daily kids eco camp each morning. Tonight we are joined by naturalist Pat Sutton, who will be taking us on a virtual garden tour through her wildlife garden in Cape May County, but more on that in a few moments. Before we get started, we want to make sure that you have a comfortable viewing experience. To that end, it is my pleasure to introduce Maurice Peterson, who will be handling all of our technical needs throughout the program. Maurice has been with WheatonArts since 1994. She is the IT director, and her undergraduate and graduate studies were in fine art, e-business, marketing, and public relations. Maurice, could you provide us with some tech tips for this webinar?
Sure, just a moment. I'm having a little trouble with the slide here. Okay, welcome everybody. So good to be here again this evening. I will make it short. I think most of everybody heard this last night, but just for those joining us today, I'm going to go over a couple things. First, this is a webinar, a Zoom webinar, so we won't see you, but you'll see us and hear us, and you can ask questions in the Q&A window, which you can activate with at the bottom. There's a little Q&A at the bottom of your screen if you're on a PC or a laptop. So click on that and you can ask questions there, and you can also like other people's questions. So give them a thumbs up and we'll see which ones are more popular or most popular. So we make sure we get to all the, we'll try to get to all the questions tonight. I'll be monitoring the chat. Now that's separate from the Q&A, and I will provide some additional links and details in the chat box, and you can also text between other attendees. So that's where Sarah asked you to let us know where you are watching us from. We'd love to hear. I want to assure you that should you lose connection for any reason, please close all the windows and then go back to your original email. You'll be able to click on that and come right back in, and don't worry. This session is being recorded. As this is a webinar, as I mentioned, only the hosts and the panelists will be heard or recorded, but that means that you're going to be able to see this later too. To customize your experiences, there is a little green icon in the upper left-hand corner, and should you have any interest in looking at that at a later time, you'll know where all those settings are. For this evening, the only thing that you may want to do is to go up there and adjust your size of the chat font. So you would click on the green icon, go to accessibility, and then adjust the icon. One last tip for you is that when Pat does show her screen, there, if you need to, there's a little vertical line, and this is after the video, but a little bit later on, if you need, you can raise your hand or chat in if you need if you have a question. But there is a vertical line that you can slide to the right so that you can enlarge Pat's screen. There's a little setting, little controls on your side. Okay, so there are 3 ways to support WheatonArts. And one is membership, the other is donation, and my favorite part, the shopping at WheatonArts, shop.wheatonarts.org. And if you would like to find out more ways to support WheatonArts, you can contact Rhody Barron at rbarron@wheatonarts.org. I mentioned membership, and I won't go over every wonderful detail, but I will remind you that gift memberships are always available and always a great gift. As I mentioned, shopping, I wanted to let you know there's some specials now and until the end of the month. You, first of all, will receive for every purchase a complimentary shopping bag from CCIA, our partners for this Eco Week. So whether you pick up curbside or have your order shipped, you'll get a free bag. And you can enjoy 15% off the entire cart. But right now we are highlighting in this slide the wild clay pots from South Jersey that you may have seen in the presentation on Sunday evening. If you want to filter and look at that special clay, pots by that special clay, you type in Ruga, R-U-G-A. I will include a lot of links in the chat, so don't worry. And don't worry, the chat will be available later too. I don't want to take you away from the wonderful presentation. And you can add a bit of sweetness to your purchase by adding Busy Bee, New Jersey, honey to your order. And that's only this week, up until and through this weekend that you can create or add that to your order. So take advantage of getting some honey shipped to your door. So I'm going to turn this over to Sarah Lacey to begin this program. Sarah Lacey is the Special Events Coordinator at WheatonArts. She recently began this role in February of 2020. So she's a new face around campus, and we're really glad to have you, Sarah. Sarah's worked as an event coordinator and sales manager previously at Willow Creek Winery in Cape May and for the Noise Museum of Art in Oceanville, New Jersey. She's excited to combine her love of art with her background in event planning at WheatonArts. She received her Bachelor of Fine Arts with a concentration on printmaking from Stockton University. Welcome, everyone, and over to you, Sarah.
Thanks for your introduction, Marcy. Just as a reminder, this program is brought to you in partnership with CU Maurice River. CU Maurice River is dedicated to protecting the watershed of Maurice River and the region known as Down Jersey, thereby enabling current and future generations to enjoy the environmental, recreational, cultural, and scenic resources of this wild and scenic global treasure. CUMR invites participation and fosters responsible stewardship. CUMR also supports education, awareness, and informed decision-making, utilizing fieldwork, research, and advocacy. I'd also like to share our Wheat and Green initiative, which is created in partnership with CU Maurice River. Wheat and Green, an overarching initiative implemented by WheatonArts over a decade ago, continues to inform our operating principles and our goal to become a sustainable organization, practically and artfully. In addition to defining a new level of best practice in our daily operations, facility planning, and goals for program relevancy, Wheat and Green reflects a commitment to participate as an environmental steward of our community. Primary to our success is the utilization of our campus as a resource to promote awareness of our environment through ongoing partnerships with the Cumberland County Improvement Authority, Citizens United Maurice River, Cumberland County Master Gardeners, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and the Rutgers Cooperative Extension Program. Examples of special projects include a demonstration rain garden, an annual eco fair, the construction of vernal pools, and other habitat restoration projects. Our most recent success has been transforming an extant railroad to a nature trail, celebrating art, nature, and the Maurice River watershed. We are now going to play a video made by CUMR staff members Carla Rossini and Megan Thompson, who are introducing Pat Sutton. Please adjust the volume of your device if necessary.
Welcome to the WheatonArts Eco Week. My name is Carla Rossini. I'm the program manager at CU Maurice River, and behind the camera is Megan Thompson, who is the assistant office manager at CU Maurice River. The organization that we work for works to conserve the natural and cultural resources of the region known as Down Jersey. We're also a National Park Service partnership organization working to implement the river management plan of the wild and scenic Maurice River. It is CU Maurice River's pleasure to bring to you Pat Sutton's garden tour virtually. Pat Sutton began her career in the 70s as a naturalist at Cape May Point State Park. She then moved to New Jersey Audubon's Cape May Bird Observatory, where she worked as a naturalist and program director for 21 years. Currently, she's working as a freelance writer, a speaker, a photographer, and a tour guide leader. And she uses her backyard habitat, her garden, her personal garden, as a teaching garden to instruct on the principles of wildlife gardening. Pat is a big believer in the idea that we can use our outdoor living spaces as stopovers to support wildlife, to support migrating butterflies and bird species. I've had the pleasure of going on many of Pat Sutton's stewardship outings. And many times afterwards, I find myself asking, how many people have been inspired by her? How many people have gotten their shovel out of their garage and went and opened up one of the 10% gardens, one of those beginner gardens, and every year have expanded on it because they were inspired by Pat? I find myself asking, how many plants have gone into the ground because of Pat's teachings? Thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of plants that have gone into the ground because of Pat? And I ask myself, how does that translate into conservation? How many flora species are being supported by what we put in our backyard? How many fauna species are finding more food, more shelter, more water because of Pat's teachings? Not just because of her teachings, but because of her infectious curiosity and her positivity. When you leave one of Pat's presentations, you feel like, I can do it. And you go home and you want to open up that bed and you want to convert that lawn that you might have into wildlife habitat. And as I hold my new son on my lap, I also ask, how does it translate into protecting the environment for future generations and for our future stewards? I find myself sometimes, I find myself thinking that what Pat has taught me has been the greatest gift to my family, because in our backyard we have a wonderful playground. We might not have the swing set, which yes, would be nice to have as well, but we might not have the swing set, but we've got caterpillars and birds, we've got bees and wasps, we've got tadpoles, we've got frogs, and it's all about learning. It's all about having fun, doing good. So I hope you enjoy this video. I hope you get a lot out of it. And if you have any questions, write them down, put them in the chat. Don't be afraid to ask, because Pat is never afraid to answer.
Thank you, Carla. Welcome everyone to my yard during COVID-19. And I'm a safe distance, so I'm going to take my mask off. And thank you for joining us for a garden tour of my ancient, now, wildlife garden. My name is Pat Sutton. For many years, I have been a naturalist, actually since the 1970s, initially at the Cape May Point State Park, and then at New Jersey Audubon's Cape May Bird Observatory. And I retired in 2007, and I've been self-employed ever since, continuing to teach about wildlife gardening. And that is because it's something I'm very passionate about. I have gotten so much joy from it that I want to share that joy with others. And a lot of people put their toe in and run into trouble and aren't quite sure what they're doing, so it's a lot of fun to help guide people and save them the angst that I've gone through over the years. The yard is an example of what we have done to entice wildlife and benefit wildlife here on our little half-acre. It is a very narrow and deep property, and once we wander through it, you might think it's acres, because we've put so much into it in the way of plantings that there's nooks and crannies and rooms and places to really quietly observe and enjoy wildlife. But it wasn't always that way. As you can see, when we purchased the property in 1977, it was bare. So it was a house with, we had a few lilacs and daffodils and daylilies, and that was it. So everything else you see, either we've planted or the birds have planted for us. And over the years, I've made many mistakes, and I have paid for them, as have others. So it's fun to try and help people keep from making some of those same mistakes. It's so easy to make mistakes since the average nursery is still selling a lot of problematic plants, including invasive plants. So early on, right here, I planted leftover Christmas trees. I planted blue spruce. They are not native to this area, and one by one they died. So that's my recommendation, is maybe plant something native so that you don't have trial and error, and nothing in the meantime. Instead, plant a red cedar. So this native evergreen behind me, and you can see that it is a female with the beautiful blue berries. In fact, it's loaded with fruit, and 32 birds feed on the fruits, and many, many butterflies lay their eggs on it. So it's a win-win for wildlife. And I planted this when it was about 4 inches high. So you really don't need to plant a big hunkin' tree. Plant little, and they will adjust. The roots will kind of settle in, and before you know it, that tree that looks like not much of anything will be shading your property and providing for wildlife. I tried to release her last night, but she was flopping around so much. It was about 7:30 when we found her, and I thought she'll just become food for birds. And here's what it came out of. That's the cocoon. And they moisten it and work their way out and then crawl up to a place to dry, and you can tell it's a female by the very skinny antenna. The male has very feathery, wider antenna. And the silk moths, many of them have no feeding parts, so they don't even nectar. Their purpose is to just find a mate, lay eggs, and she's already started laying eggs. I often recommend that people go beyond the flower garden for butterflies and hummingbirds and plant a tree, plant a shrub. In fact, a perennial garden is a lot of work, so try to fill in as much of your space as possible with things that are not going to require a lot of tending. And a tree provides shade, and it also provides for wildlife, if it's native. So 36 years ago, I planted this tulip. And when I planted it, it was 1 foot high. It was a twig. And I said to my husband, as we looked down at this little twig, this will shade the house. And he said, right. Well, today this tulip shades the house. And when it was little and I could see the leaves, I often found tiger swallowtail caterpillars. And that's one of the many butterflies that lay their eggs on this. So this was lawn. We had 2 English setters that were very rambunctious, and they loved all this romping around area. But we no longer had them by 2012, and rather than mow this, I thought, let's put a meadow in. It's largely sunny, so it's a perfect spot for a meadow, and that first year, 2012, we didn't mow, and some neat things came up. And over the years, I've enhanced what came up naturally with other plantings from my perennial garden, like purple coneflower, Culver's root, hyssop-leafed thoroughwort, little blue stem, wild columbine that's already bloomed, butterfly weed, and in the foreground here I have pussy toes, and here's a weedy plant. This is lamb's quarters, but a butterfly lays their eggs on it. So everything, oh, and violets. The variegated fritillary lays their eggs on violets. So everything in here serves a purpose as nectar, caterpillar food, or both. And so over here, this was another experiment, and we did this the next year, 2013. I started gardening with vigor here under the tulip tree rather than mow. So this had all been lawn, kind of limping along, and I planted this alternate leafed dogwood. which is a beautiful native understory tree. Butterflies nectar on it when it's in flower. It's already passed. Now it's in fruit. The birds feed on the fruits. And dogwoods are very important as a caterpillar plant, native dogwoods. So it's serving as caterpillar food as well. When I first planted it, it was just a little guy. And now it is getting up to some of the lower branches of the tulip tree. And in addition to the understory tree that I planted perennials. And one of the top native perennials used by butterflies and moths for egg laying are the asters. And this one is called common blue wood aster. And I started with about 3 plants close to the trunk. And those plants have seeded further and further out each year. In my lawn, there's lots of babies. So here's a baby, and they keep seeding further and further out into the lawn, which thrills me. So wildlife gardening does not have to be hugely expensive. Once you start, rather than try to contain things you've planted, let them do what they want to do. Let them spread. Some people do not like how common blue wood aster spreads. I am loving it. This is an area we no longer have to mow. I think it's 112 butterflies and moths lay their eggs on this, here in this area. I mean, try to find one of those caterpillars. The birds are finding them. The birds are always in here finding food. So I know this is serving as a great banquet for wildlife. And it blooms in the fall, so then it's lots of nectar, it's lots of color, and it brings me great joy. So the elderberry is in bloom. Lots of butterflies and moths lay their eggs on this, and over the years I found some fun caterpillars. Sawflies also lay their eggs on this, and their caterpillars look like a butterfly or moth caterpillar. And recently, the cedar waxwings nesting overhead have been coming in here to eat the sawfly larvae and take them back to their nest. But I've let pokeweed come up. So this is pokeweed, and it will have beautiful blueberries come fall. The stem will turn magenta. It's really striking. And 50 different birds feed on the fruits of this weed, pokeweed. And you'll see that bird feeding, my water features are tucked in here and there, and the birds really appreciate the cover. So as I drive by a yard where there's lawn and a bird bath plunked in the center with no activity, it's often why. There's just not enough cover for the birds to feel safe. An Appalachian brown. They breed on sedges in wet woods, and way back there's a place where they breed, but they come into our yard for the fruit dishes, where I put fruit out, because they're drawn to things like rotting fruit, a dead animal, kind of some funky stuff, but it's such a treat to get to see them. So early on, when we created our vegetable garden in the sunniest spot, this part of the yard that was a bit shady, we didn't mow. And up came this hackberry tree that is over me and the American holly that's behind me. So a lot of folks who are trying to create wildlife habitat, it might be as simple as not mowing. In this case, the person we bought the property from had bulldozed down the hackberry and the holly. So they were coming up from old roots. But we were thrilled to not have to plant these. They are native trees, very beneficial, and it's created a corridor of native vegetation along this edge that birds utilize to get up to water stations that we have, bird baths in the summer and a heated bird bath in the winter. And when we first purchased the property, we had 2 English setters. And we put a chain link fence around our backyard to contain the dogs. And we let vegetation grow over it. And today, even though our neighbors are very close, we have wonderful privacy because of those vegetated chain link fences. So that too has created kind of a wildlife corridor that a lot of birds and other wildlife use. And now we'll head into the perennial garden. So we've created garden rooms here by putting in 2 wildlife ponds, and this is rather amazing. We had hundreds of tadpoles in these ponds and lots of adult frogs, leopard frog, green frog, are several dragonflies, and the one that is closest is a blue dasher with those beautiful turquoise eyes, and the sides of its body are very stripy. And that blue dasher undoubtedly emerged from this pond. And the second dragonfly that just took off and landed is a great blue skimmer with blue eyes and a white face and quite a bit bigger. And they too lay eggs in our pond, and the whole life cycle occurs, and this great blue skimmer undoubtedly emerged from our ponds. These ponds are just so much fun. You never know what you're going to see. The pickerel weed in bloom is a great nectar plant. Right now it has a silver-spotted skipper on it. There's a number of bumblebees on it. And water snakes give birth to live young. So who knows how many were in our garden. We only saw 2 at a time, so it seems that 2 really settled in here. And they were both in our second pond, but now they're big enough that they're probably not tolerating each other. So one is in this pond and one is in the other pond. And they have been feasting on our tadpoles. And we're quite thrilled. We figure that enough tadpoles are surviving and the frogs have moved out of the pond and they're nearby. If I stepped into the vegetation, they'd be leaping about. But initially, people do panic when they see all these bees and wasps, not understanding how desperate they are for nectar and how important they are as pollinators, not to just our native plants, but farmers are struggling without enough pollinators. So if you can have a garden like this that is benefiting pollinators, they're moving beyond this garden and benefiting many wild plants and vegetable gardens nearby as well. My garden has wonderful nectar in the spring, wild columbine, the coral honeysuckle on the arbor, sundrops, a type of primrose, a lot of native trees and shrubs. But it really comes into its own in early July. So you're seeing the beginning of the real punch, and that happens when the bee balm blooms, the swamp milkweed, the liatris is starting to bloom. I haven't seen these before. Here are aphids on one of my goldenrods. This is stiff goldenrod. And aphids have decided they like it. It's a different aphid than you find on milkweed. Milkweed attracts oleander aphids, and I am not a fussy gardener, so these aphids do not freak me out. Instead, I'm kind of excited to have them because the hummingbirds are drawn to nectar, but a large part of their diet is also soft-bodied insects. So hummingbirds, when you see them hovering at a plant that's not in flower, they're eating things like spiders and aphids. And I'll bet the hummingbirds will find these, or ladybugs will find these aphids and make short order of them. everything in the garden is perennials or a few annuals, and that's because, remember, we're on a septic field. So if you have a septic field you're mowing, think of this as an alternative, a perennial garden instead. You couldn't plant trees and shrubs on it, but there's no reason you can't plant a lot of perennials on it. All the milkweeds, this is common milkweed, and behind me is my milkweed stand, and I've got the Monarch Way Station signage. So butterfly weed in the foreground, another type of milkweed, and a lot of it here, some blooming, some not yet blooming. Common milkweed behind, and with this heat and lack of rain, things are blooming and done so quickly this year. So the tidy gardener would probably not tolerate all these outliers, like this common milkweed here, and we have some even further this way. I've got two of them that want to come up in the midst of my sweet pepper bush, a third, and it does a lot of wandering, the common milkweed. But I find that when monarchs do find this garden, they actually like the outliers for egg laying. So they'll lay in my big stand, but they'll also use the outliers, like this one. So I kind of let them all come up. I love monarchs, and common milkweed is aggressive. I try to urge people not to use the word invasive for a native plant. Common milkweed, it wanders. So plant it where you don't mind it wandering, and monarchs will benefit for egg laying, and all butterflies will benefit when it is blooming. And I find that these outliers bloom later. So this one hasn't bloomed yet. So it extends the nectar season for common milkweed. And once it's done blooming, I just step back and leave it, because monarchs will lay eggs on this right through the fall, one generation after the next. And a couple years ago, in my milkweed stand, I added some of the tall or giant sunflower. So that'll bloom in the fall, and it'll jazz this area up with more nectar, because by then the common milkweed will be completely done. So kind of in your milkweed stand, think about adding a few other things that will bloom come fall. So in 2007, I retired from New Jersey Audubon Society, and walking through our property, a third of it is woods. And we feel very grateful we even have them, because the person we bought the house from apologized that his bulldozer broke down, and he couldn't bulldoze these trees down. So we have the woods because of that. But in years of working crazy hours, I am busy with the garden, I had stopped realizing what was happening in our woods. And Clay had always mowed a path through the woods, and otherwise our woods were a wall of multiflora rose and Japanese honeysuckle. And really not good for wildlife, with that being the case. So I interviewed two people, and the first came and he looked at our project, and he said, "You want me to do this over 2 or 3 years?" I said, "I'll call you." And the second guy came, and he said, "I love destruction. I can do this in a day." We hired him. And with a brush hog, Clay and I beforehand went through our woods and flagged everything we didn't want him to mess with, including standing dead trees. We wanted them left standing. And all of the trees that were there. But nothing had come up in many years because no light was getting to the forest floor. So this guy, with a brush hog, in one day ground up all this multiflora rose, so it was literally like wood chips on the ground. And here's before and the day of when he was done. And it is pretty amazing that since, so much has come up. So the seed bank was in the soil of oaks and sassafras and hollies and red cedars and black cherries and hackberry trees and all these wonderful native trees, but they hadn't been able to grow because of this wall of non-native vegetation. And since then, I prowl the woods and I do dig up anything coming up like English ivy, even though I haven't planted it. The birds are drawn to our yard. They've eaten English ivy elsewhere. They feed on the fruit. It passes through their system. They're planting it. So I can't let down my guard. Is a caterpillar. This is a hackberry tree, and this little caterpillar was hanging from a silken thread, and it looks like an American snout caterpillar, and they lay their eggs on hackberry. Oh, and I'm seeing eggs on these leaves. Oh, this is too cool. And behind the hackberry is our brush pile. And we're of the mind, rather than put things out on the curb, over the years we've put things here, and this is 40 plus years of stuff after storms that has come down. And a lot of the box turtles and the snakes winter in this brush pile, because as the plant material is breaking down, it's quite toasty. So come the winter months, we know there's box turtles in here. We've seen them come out covered with dirt from our brush pile. Clay tells me I have to start a new one. This is how I tackle invasive plants. As I find them back here, I will dig them up, get the roots and all, put them in a closed trash can, and let them kind of break down and rot. I made the mistake with one invasive of just creating a pile of it, and it started to root and wander. So definitely contain any invasives that you find. And in Talamy's work, black cherry is at the top of the list. I mean, oaks are at the top, and right under oaks, members of the cherry family. So black cherry in our woods, red-spotted purples lay their eggs on them. A number of the silk moths, many birds feed on the fruits. So who knew that that dead-looking cherry was still supporting life? It's amazing. So the corridor here along the path, I've planted some shade-loving plants, and in the spring it's just lights up with lots of things blooming. It's reaching kind of the quiet phase, but behind the plantings, I have a shrub called a spice bush. And the spice bush swallowtail is a beautiful butterfly that lays its eggs on both this shrub, spice bush, and on the tree, sassafras. And here's a baby sassafras right here that I didn't plant, that is just coming up. So between those two plants, I have many, many spice bush swallowtails drawn to our yard. So this is what a male spice bush looks like, and here is what a female looks like. Her hind wing is a slightly different color. And you might mistake them for black swallowtails, which lay their eggs on fennel, rue, carrot, Queen Anne's lace, golden Alexander. But the black swallowtail has 2 rows of dots out the forewing, and the male has all this yellow where the female does not. But what happens with the spice bush swallowtail, it lands on what it thinks are its caterpillar plants. And any butterfly, when it lands on a plant that's not in flower, you want to have your binocs and really get a close look, because the butterfly is tasting the plant to see if it's the caterpillar plant. And if it is, it'll then lay its egg. And the caterpillar of the spicebush swallowtail creates a silken path along the leaf and hides inside when that leaf curls shut. Let's just see if somebody's home. Nobody's home. So that, do you see the silken path though? So that caterpillar got too big for this space. So I see another silken room right here, and nobody is home there. But let's see if we can't find another silken room. Now this leaf, see how much bigger it is? So probably a pretty big caterpillar's inside. Let's just see. Yes. So there is the early life stage of a spicebush swallowtail caterpillar. And when they are young, they look like a bird dropping, and as they get older, they look like a snake. So in each case, that is a protective pattern to keep birds from eating them. Because believe me, this is what birds want to find to feed their young. That's why native plants are so important. They are full of the caterpillar stage of so many of our butterflies and moths. And you can see that silken path that it's created to pull the leaf shut. And as I just take my hand away, it's back in its hidey hole. And I find walking through here, the temperature is much cooler. I just love to come back into the woods and see all the things that are coming up on their own. And so many of them have come up since 2009. Like here's an oak tree that is as old as when we cleared out all the invasives. So this oak has had a chance to come up, and the Polyphemus moth that emerged last night from that cocoon, this is the primary food that their caterpillars eat, are oak leaves. So I wouldn't be surprised to find one of their caterpillars here. We hung a hummingbird feeder back here, and it's one of the busiest feeders on our property. And we'll often sit here and they come in and perch in all the dead twigs overhead. As a new gardener, definitely acquire Doug Tallamy's book and embrace the plants that he recommends. I share a lot of information via my website of what I feel are the chocolate cake nectar plants. Certainly Citizens United to Protect the Maurice River with their certification program. Visit reputable native plant nurseries. They're very helpful. People who grow native plants are knowledgeable about the best siting of them. So look at your property and determine sunny spots. That's where you want to put your perennial garden. If you don't have much in the way of trees, definitely plant a native tree and perhaps choose an oak, the most beneficial native tree, according to Doug Tallamy, or a black cherry. And right there you've created habitat by planting that tree. And then under the tree, plant some shade-loving asters and goldenrods, and you'll be off to a galloping start. And by putting in a perennial garden in the sunniest spot, mass your plantings so that there's a lot of punch as you look at the garden. It's really like, wow, you want to go out there and take a look at it, and butterflies are zooming into it. Definitely include lots of caterpillar plants like milkweed for monarchs, and that first monarch coming in to lay eggs will hook you to the degree where you cannot grow enough caterpillar plants. You're going to be looking for other caterpillar plants to add to your offerings. And there are lots of knowledgeable people who are happy to share. Certainly a garden tour like this is an eye-opener. It's wonderful. that CU Maurice River is hosting something like this to show people the potential of what's possible. And I am not a gardener. So I am not really a gardener at all. I love wildlife. So I've had many trial and error, things that didn't work. Don't be shy about it. Learn from it. Embrace it. If something doesn't work, don't give up. If you buy something, buy in groups of 3, if it's perennials, and plant them in what you think is the best spot, but maybe choose a couple spots of 3 more, and the happiest spot, they're going to tell you where they're happy. So consider it a wonderful learning experience, and keep a journal of what you see, and definitely photograph. Photograph that bare area where you started, and the following, over the course of the year and the following year, you will be flabbergasted at the transition, as will your friends and family and neighbors. My favorite part of my garden is where the action is. So that changes over the course of the day, it changes over the course of the season, and every time I come out here, I feel like a child with wonder filling me up as I walk through. I remember things I've seen, and I can't help but head to the ponds often first. You know, is the snake sunbathing? Are there neat pollinators at the pickerel weed? I'm out here day and night. I'm out here at night photographing tree frogs that are calling and drawing in mates. My fruit dishes, I come out during the day to see who's drawn to them. At night, I find underwing moths drawn into the fruit. The box turtle this morning at the melon that I had up on my porch last night, that was a highlight. I don't know that there's any one spot. I feel grateful things have worked out, and it's always changing. So this tulip tree that I planted 36 years ago, that is day by day shading more and more of my garden. So my perennial garden is becoming a shade garden. So what I loved so much for years is transitioning, and maybe that'll work out. By the time it becomes a shade garden and I can't really maintain all this, I'll be in my rocker watching with my binoculars, and you know, right now I do all the work. And this year there was a lot, redoing the path, invasives coming into the woods, and I just added up last night. I put 233 hours into the garden since March. And Clay, doing the math, said, Pat, that's like over 5 weeks, 40-hour weeks. That's shocking. And with COVID-19, this year I did have that time. Normally I would have been distracted with a lot of programs and materials I was freshening and updating. So this year I really got ahead of myself. So years to come should not take that kind of effort. But I love it all. I do love it all. There's no one spot that draws me. It all does. I think it's how it all works together. It is great to definitely get your yard certified by as many different groups, organizations as possible that are focused on wildlife habitat. This was the project I was involved with for many years, the Cape May Stopover Project, and I taught the workshops that help certify people. Long-standing National Wildlife Federation's wildlife habitat certification. Citizens United to Protect the Maurice River has a wonderful certification program as well, multifaceted, for habitat creation, for preservation of the health of areas through wise water use. Just so many layers to CU Maurice River's program.
All right, the stewardship program was created to raise awareness, provide education, and give resources so that people and businesses can lead by example. So here you'll see our 3 designations: stream friendly, wildlife friendly, and eco leader. If you have a private residence, you can see about becoming stream friendly designated or wildlife friendly designated. If you are a business owner, you can look into our Eco Leader designation. We have pamphlets here with important information and also checklists. So this makes it really easy so that you can become designated and be a leader in conservation, and this promotes biodiversity. So if you're interested in designating your property, which I'm sure you are, you can reach out to us and email us at info@cumorrisriver.org. You can also find out more information about this and even download the pamphlet on our website, which is www.cumorrisriver.org.
Everyone enjoyed that. What I'm going to share now is what the garden has evolved into since July 2nd, when that video was made, just to bring you up to speed. And it's just under 10 minutes. Our garden, just prior to the July 2nd virtual tour filmed by CU Morris River, this was on June 24th. And the virtual tour really showcased the true bones of our wildlife garden. And here we are just after the virtual tour on July 17th, when wild bergamot was in full bloom and a magnet for pollinators. And many of us recall how hot and dry our summer was. Well, eastern box turtles, like this one, were regulars in our pond, going for a dip to cool down. The pickerel weed in our ponds has provided nectar all summer and will continue to do so through fall. Here's a snowberry clearwing. The pond continues to entertain. The water snakes actually left after the tropical storm. I think when everything was wet, it was like one big lake and off they went. But just the other day, hidden in all this vegetation, was this stunning ribbon snake. Since the virtual tour, we survived Tropical Storm Isaias and some torrential rains. On August 13th and 14th, we had close to 4 inches of rain. And each rain this summer triggered southern gray tree frogs to breed again and again. And this is one of the photographs I took at night when the males were singing, like the one on the right, to draw in females. And a treat was finding this young gray tree frog that had been born in our ponds and emerged from the pond as a young adult and was on the plant vegetation eating insects. The ponds attracted this swamp darner to lay her eggs just the other day, and our habitat was home to many, many moths, including this polyphemus moth, and drew in many, many butterflies and continues to do so, including this tawny emperor. Especially exciting for me as a naturalist was finding 14 tawny emperor caterpillars on a hackberry tree in our side yard, including these 2. And they were on a branch that probably the average person would have clipped back. So really everything we do in our yard, I question whether or not it will adversely affect wildlife. And in this case, by not clipping back these low branches that were kind of in the way, I benefited these tawny emperors. Our partridge pea has exploded around the pond and now is in full bloom and stunning. It is buzzing when you're next to it with nectaring bumblebees. And it's pulling in cloudless sulfurs. Here a mated pair, and here a female laying her eggs on the partridge pea. The eggs are tiny. There's 7 of them in this photograph, but so I don't frustrate you, I've given you some hints as to where they are. So every day we search for caterpillars. Sometimes we're lucky and find them, and sometimes they're so camouflaged we don't find them. American goldfinch have been daily visitors to our garden, here feeding on purple coneflower seed heads. I don't deadhead for just this reason. And I took these today. So they're still out there feasting on seed heads. Our milkweed garden has flourished and attracted many, many monarchs. Here a female laying an egg, which is very tiny. And here a newly hatched caterpillar, teensy tiny when they first hatch, and one a bit bigger. And I've been finding monarch caterpillars every day. So I'm a pretty happy wildlife gardener. And I'm also very hopeful about this fall's monarch migration. If all wildlife gardens have stands of milkweed where monarchs laying eggs can succeed, and I took this photograph today, and she's laying on butterfly weed, which is another of the milkweeds, and also taken today, here's a female laying eggs on my swamp milkweed. So if all of us have wildlife gardens where we let milkweeds grow and we've planted a variety of milkweeds in different places so that predators can't find all the caterpillars, then this fall should prove to be a really good monarch migration. Because what we're all doing is building the population of monarchs, generation by generation. Here's the garden since the virtual tour in early August with cutleaf coneflower, garden phlox, Joe Pye weed, ironweed, so many things that are coming into bloom and blooming. So it really is an area of transition through the course of the seasons. Cutleaf coneflower and ironweed on August 1st, and they are both still blooming. The ironweed a favorite with pollinators, like this dark female tiger swallowtail. And here cutleaf coneflower with 4 red-banded hair streaks on it. Of course, predators are drawn in too, like this wheelbug, because all of these good nectar plants are like little supermarkets for predators as well. And boneset here with more red-banded hair streaks, Joe Pye weed with a tiger swallowtail. Mountain mint is in full bloom right now, here with a juniper hair streak, and a predator, a wheelbug, and a beautiful wasp nectaring. Hummingbirds have been thick and are benefiting from the still blooming Carl honeysuckle and all the other nectar in our garden, like Carl honeysuckle, like cardinal flower. And blue ensign, not a native salvia, but one that is a perennial in my garden, and it is not invasive, so I cherish it. They're coming to the few flowers of bee balm that are still blooming, that were blooming profusely back on July 2nd when the virtual tour was filmed. They're coming into my garden phlox, and they're coming into annuals like Mexican sunflower. Sneezeweed is just beginning to bloom. And this garden edge to the left of very tall plants is yet to bloom. It's full of tall sunflower, late flowering thoroughwort. There's some ironweed tucked in there. And in the foreground, next to the purple coneflower, is Baltonia. So here it was on August 2nd, and today the Baltonia is in full bloom. The asters and goldenrod show is yet to happen. So a wildlife garden of native perennials and trees and shrubs and vines just keeps on unfolding and providing for pollinators and hungry birds. So thanks for letting me share with you this update since the virtual tour of what's happening in the garden now and has happened between then and now. Thanks.
Thank you, Pat. It's beautiful.
Thank you, Marcy.
You have quite a number of questions that Sarah's going to be coming on and talking to you about.
Excellent.
Okay, I'm
ready.
ready when you are.
I am ready.
Awesome. So Sharon Hardy is looking to hear if you have any plants that are rabbit and deer resistant in your garden.
I don't know if you noticed the fencing around a lot of my plants. I have a fence around the perennial garden that we initially put up to keep the dogs out when we had 2 English setters, and they're gone, but we still have the fence. And it keeps large rabbits out, but it doesn't keep young rabbits out. So within that fencing, I have put chicken wire, only about 1.5 feet high, around some of the favorites that rabbits eat to the ground. And I find that is truly the only solution, because these are plants I want in my garden. The rabbits decimate my Turk's cap lily, which is beautiful, smooth blue aster, and a number of other plants. And over the years, with us having dogs, we did fence, so deer have not been an issue in my garden. And as I've taught workshops, I've urged people to really seriously consider fencing so that you can plant everything you would like. The deer will eat things to the ground, and that's what they're doing in so many areas. And to have the diversity that you really want with an understory, you almost need to fence it. We did fence our woods with netting that is about 3 inches by 3 inches, so birds can fly through it, and that has kept the deer out. And you don't really notice it. So there is fencing that is not an eyesore.
Okay, awesome. April Fisher's asking if the aster gets enough sun under the dogwood.
Yes, that's a great question, because a lot of us are familiar with New England aster, which is a plant that likes sunshine. So in my sunlit perennial garden, I have planted New England aster, smooth blue aster, aromatic aster, and a number of other asters that flourish in a sunny spot. But there are also many, many native perennials that instead favor a shaded area. And the aster under my tulip is a different aster. It's common blue wood aster, and another one that likes shade is whitewood aster, and both of those are very robust in a shady area, bloom in the fall, and give you so much beautiful color in under your trees. And that's true of goldenrods too. There are some wonderful shade-loving goldenrods like zigzag goldenrod, wreath goldenrod. Nurseries are familiar with what works in shade and what works in sun. So they'll be helpful if you have a shady spot and want to start putting in some of these wonderful native perennials.
Okay, awesome. Kathleen A. DeTana is asking, is another name for alternate leaf dogwood pagoda dogwood?
Yes, it is. Yes, that is correct.
Smart cookie. Okay. Ginny Shanahan's asking, how do you keep your bird baths clean? Mine always develop algae and turn the water and sides of the bird bath brown.
Yes, good question. People do not realize that mosquitoes can lay their eggs, and you can end up with an adult mosquito in very few days. I mean, something like 3 to 5 days. So at least every 3 to 5 days, you want to be scrubbing out your bird bath anyway, and then putting in fresh water. And I have purchased some lightweight bird baths that are made of resin that are easy to clean with a scrub brush.
Oh.
You just need a little bit of muscle. I have tried to let people know about them though, and with COVID-19 and a lot of products hard to come by, the one I like so much, which was easily available everywhere, is not available right now.
Okay. that answered another question that Joan Banbrick asked about mosquitoes. So we were double dipping on that one.
Right, and I learned recently that a lot of my potted plants on my back porch, I had saucers under them.
Mhm.
A biologist came and explained to me that I really shouldn't let the water sit in those dishes. We are coping with a non-native mosquito, the Asiatic tiger mosquito, and they're really persistent and tiny, and they hurt when they bite you. And the female scopes out places like a shallow dish under your pots where water will collect, and she will lay her eggs in that. And when it rains, the egg's already there, it hatches, and something like 3 days later, you have adult Asiatic tiger mosquitoes. So I no longer have those dishes under my plants.
When I worked at the winery in Cape May, the mosquito commission used to come out, and they used to do mosquito training all the time.
Yes.
Get in trouble for the little divots.
Yep.
Let's see. Lois Powella, sorry if I mispronounced your name. I understand wanting to encourage butterflies and birds. In the beginning, wasps were mentioned. What do they add?
Well, they're part of the package. So if you put a garden in for butterflies, you are also going to attract bees and wasps, and most of them are native. And they're also important pollinators, just like butterflies. Years ago, a friend visited me in my garden, and she had 2 young sons, and she saw the bee balm, and she saw the butterflies and the hummingbird moths and the hummingbirds, and she had to have some of that bee balm. So I sent her home I just dug some right out of my garden, sent her home with it, and lo and behold, bees came to it. She panicked, and she dug it out and got rid of it and called me and said, bees came to that bee balm. And I said, yes, yeah, they're important pollinators. They need nectar too. And today, her sons are grown. She's an avid wildlife gardener. She got over her phobia of bees and replanted bee balm. But truly, in my garden, which is full of bees and wasps nectaring, I have never been stung. They are so focused on nectaring and getting pollen and providing for their nest, and they're good predators. They're very important and part of the ecosystem. They're eaten by birds. Purple martins eat them. They play a big role. So we can't really have butterflies and butterfly gardens without also having bees and wasps and some really beautiful flies. I mean, the things I photographed in my garden that I never would have noticed have been quite exquisite.
Okay. Mary Normandia is asking, hi, Pat. My monarch caterpillars turned black and died, and this was a banner year for them in Bucks County. What killed them? Also, this is a 2-part question. Also, the milkweed has no pods this year. Why? Thanks.
Okay, the second question I might answer first.
Okay.
It almost sounds like if there are no pods on the milkweed, and those are the seeds, it sounds like the milkweed was not pollinated, because that is what triggers seed development. And that is scary. If the milkweed did not develop pods, it wasn't pollinated. My milkweed is developing pods slowly. So it still hasn't really happened yet. It's happening. You might have pods and not be noticing them. They might be so small. But when you find a caterpillar that has turned black and shriveled up and is dangling on a plant, there are many predators that will prey on all caterpillars, and they're not really targeting just monarchs. They're targeting some of the pest caterpillars that are problems for farmers, so they are beneficial, but some of these predators will find monarch caterpillars. The spined soldier beetle, I've found them in my garden, and I've watched them stalk a monarch caterpillar, and then they insert their sucking parts and they suck it dry, and you end up with this, you know, black, what's left of the monarch hanging there. And then there are also some wasps which will eat monarch caterpillars and just chow down on them, or carry them back to their nests. There's really a world of predators out there that are kind of part of the package. When you have a wildlife garden, you just have to kind of grin and bear it, and realize that these predators are drawn to your garden because so much is going on in it. You have so much for those predators to eat. It's kind of like a supermarket. So, truly, in the wild, a dry summer like this, natural areas are crisped. Any nectar plants really burnt up in that scorching hot weather we had for almost 2 months with no rain. And that really makes it tougher on the predators, so they end up drawn to our gardens where we're watering things, keeping plants alive, and we have an abundance of pollinators, and to a predator, that is food. So you could go to Monarch Watch's website and also Journey North's website and type in predators of monarchs, and you'll be highly educated about all the predators that will feed on the caterpillar stage and make a dent in the population in some cases. Hope
Okay.
I answered that.
I think, no, you definitely did. Let's see. Pam Weichman, is there a good resource for learning how to properly install a wildlife pond?
You could email me or contact me through my website, and I often teach a workshop called How to Create a No-Fuss Wildlife Pond. And I have a handout that I share with people that I'm regularly updating, and it really covers a lot of the things that you need to know. If you go into a garden center, they're going to send you down a rabbit hole where you end up with an outdoor fish aquarium, not a wildlife pond, because they want to sell you fish, they want to sell you fish food, they want to sell you the aerator, they want to sell you all this stuff, but a wildlife pond does not have fish. Fish you put into a pond are koi and other non-native species. So those fish don't really belong in a wildlife pond. A wildlife pond draws in egg-laying dragonflies and damselflies. It draws in frogs that are breeding and laying their eggs, out of which hatch tadpoles. It just attracts so much wildlife that benefits because the fish are not in the pond. So definitely contact me for my handout. I'd love to share it with you. And if I'm ever presenting that program and you are a Garden Gang member, you can join my Garden Gang on my website. I always send alerts out when I'm doing programs, and that's a very popular program for people.
Awesome. And then Carla has also endorsed it. They
Just
walked
a
away.
moment here. Just a moment here. We're getting a lot of questions, and I want to make sure everybody gets their questions in the queue. I'm sorry to interrupt, but I want you to ask everyone to put your questions in line in the Q&A. We're getting a lot of questions as well in the chat. Thank you.
Okay, let's see.
I'm sorry about the pond. We just installed a pond this year, and we live in a suburban neighborhood where there are a lot of gutters, and we have a lot of mosquito issues in our neighborhood. And I would like to say that when we put our pond in, at first we had larvae in it, but we had frogs within a week, 2 weeks.
Oh my
Mhm.
goodness.
And within another week, all of that mosquito larva was basically gone. I don't think it was just the frogs, but it balanced itself out quite quickly. And I would like, we have so many dragonflies right now that our mosquitoes they haven't just, disappeared, but they've, the population is much smaller right now. So,
Yeah, and Carla, that's a good point because in the pond, dragonflies will start laying their eggs almost immediately in a wildlife pond if there's emergent vegetation. And when the larvae hatch, the dragonfly nymph feasts on mosquito larvae. So yes, mosquitoes are still laying eggs in your pond, but the healthy dragonfly population is keeping them in check. And the dragonfly nymphs are getting fatter and fatter on mosquito larvae.
That was good feedback too. Let's see. Pat, how do you keep pokeweed from crowding out and smothering other plants? I had some presents from birds, but last year had to tear it all out along with Jimson weed and poison ivy because they left no room for my perennials to grow.
Great point. I'm always walking through the garden, and it's fun to keep a journal. If you have a mystery plant, photograph it as it continues to grow. And if it turns into a pokeweed, then the next year, you know what it looks like when it's a youngster, and you can pull it out when the root is not going to China. It sounds like the ones you had to take out of your garden were big, robust plants with roots going to China. Pokeweed is a native plant, very beneficial to wildlife. I love it. And I have 2 places in my yard where I let it grow, and it's gorgeous there. It grows in the shade under my white pines, and it also grows in with my elderberry. So when the elderberry's in bloom, you don't even notice the pokeweed. And then the elderberry's done, and you have pokeweed flowering and producing berries, and it's kind of a neat combination. And in under the white pine, it's a nice understory of stalks for birds to sit on as they come into the water station. You saw a photograph in the film of a hummingbird bathing on a pokeweed leaf under the mister. So pick and choose where you want these things to grow. And yes, you do want to try and remove them when they're young before they take hold, because the birds are planting them around your yard.
Okay, I'm going to skip another question, and I'm going to ask now, will the invasives in the closed garbage can decompose so you can use it in your garden, or do you need to throw it out so it doesn't root or seed?
Good question. Yes, the trash can in my woods where I put invasive plants, I keep them in there and I let them rot. And every now and then I will fill up a trash can and put it on the curb for the township to take. I'd love it not to be used as plant material. They want plant material in an open trash can, and I'm not sure what they do with it. I'd like it to never be part of anything in case any bit of it is alive. So I make sure that it's good and dead, but I don't recycle it on my own property. I get it out of there.
Okay, awesome. And Barbara Dawson from New Brunswick is asking, which milkweed do you find to be the best attractant?
I have as many milkweeds as I can fit into my yard. So I have all the native milkweeds that occur here in South Jersey, and each of them likes a different habitat. So the butterfly weed I've tried to plant where it's dry. That's a milkweed that will grow in really barren situations, a sandy soil. It's also called Railroad Annie because it grows in the cinders along railroad tracks. So if you have an area where nothing much will grow because it's too barren, try planting butterfly weed there. In wet areas, I have planted swamp milkweed that likes wet, and I don't have wet areas. So I have my rain barrels emptying into my swamp milkweed garden. And then the common milkweed I've put at the back of the garden so I can kind of keep it in check, because if I don't, someday my entire garden will be common milkweed. The other one, poke milkweed, grows in the woods in shade, and I've planted that several times in my woods. It hasn't really flourished, so I don't have it anymore. And there's another one, another native one, world milkweed, and I've tried that as well, and it hasn't really survived. So I just have lots of different places for all three that are hardy in my garden. And that way, any predators looking for monarch caterpillars cannot find them all. I don't have all my milkweed in one spot.
Okay.
So I hope that helps.
Now, Lori Jo Jameson is asking, can you talk about your drip water source high in the trees?
Yes, I have a mister that is long tubing, and at the end of the tubing is a nozzle that mists out water. And the beginning of the tubing I've attached to a hose, and I have the water on, and the water, you don't need electricity, you just need a water source. And the tubing goes way up into a tree on the edge of my garden. And as it mists out of that mister at the end, it sprinkles down onto the branches of the tree below it, and then the understory of pokeweed and perennials under that. And so many songbirds come into the mister to take a bath. Even now that we've been getting rain, the birds still like the mister, rather than, they're coming to the bird baths, but they love the mister and all the wet branches and leaves, and they just roll around on wet leaves and take a bath. And it's especially fun to watch hummingbirds do that, because a bird bath to a hummingbird is like the Atlantic Ocean. But a wet leaf is perfect for a bath if you're a tiny hummingbird.
Gotcha. Let's see. Gwen, are there any common mistakes that you'd suggest they avoid? I think this is in terms of wildlife gardening, general question.
Yeah, I think we all make mistakes and we learn from them. So I think that is the take-home message. Do not be fearful. And over the years, as I've taught about wildlife gardening, I've tried to encourage people to not take on too much. Maybe look at your property and come up with a list of all the things you'd like to do, and then tackle them bit by bit. Maybe each year try to change 10% of your property. And the first 10% could be a butterfly garden in the sunniest part of your yard, and make it a manageable size so that you can maintain it and learn from it and not be overwhelmed by it. And then as that garden succeeds and seeds drop to the ground and you have babies, you have your own material to create more gardens. It doesn't have to break the bank. Maybe the next year start planting under some of your trees and create shade gardens with native perennials. Plant an oak tree. That's a really important step for wildlife, with over 500 different species of butterflies and moths laying their eggs on oaks. There's all those caterpillars that birds are eating. Oaks are just so beneficial. So don't be fearful, learn from what you do and have fun with it. Document it. If something doesn't make it, try it in several different places. I'm still learning. We'll never know it all. It's very complex and fun. So see it as a fun learning experience. You become a big kid when you garden for wildlife. You can't wait to get out there.
Oh, that's a good tip. That's just a good perspective. Let's
Excuse me,
see.
Sarah.
Yeah, sure.
Could you speak a little bit about the idea of leaving biomass, leaving cuttings, creating habitat by leaving your leaves and creating brush piles, things like that?
Sure. Thank you, Carla. That is a great question. And a lot of wildlife gardening is learning how to garden in a wildlife friendly way. And the average gardener, without even realizing it, does a lot of harm to wildlife. Raking leaves off their property and sending them away as trash is really sad, because there's so much life in the fallen leaves. There are many butterfly and moth caterpillars that are partially grown. There are chrysalises and cocoons of butterflies and moths. There are lightning bug larvae. All this cool stuff lives in fallen leaves. I refuse to call it leaf litter. That is so negative. It isn't litter, it is life. So fallen leaves are full of life. And certainly if you have too many of them on your property, rather than put them out on the curb, think about putting them somewhere where that life can still survive. So putting them on the edge of your property, not in giant piles so they decompose, but in shallow layers so that the wildlife in them can benefit. And one of the things that a lot of gardeners do in the fall is clean up their garden. And this is something that wildlife gardeners learn early on not to do, because when you cut down all the vegetation, you are taking away very important cover for a time of year that is very stressful. The winter is one of the hardest times on wildlife. So a standing garden through winter is where many birds find cover. They're eating the seeds that are on the seed heads of the plants that have been left standing. There are insect larvae in plant stems, and you'll see woodpeckers pecking on plant stems to get to those insect larvae. The insect larvae they don't find gets to survive and emerge in the spring. If you cut the garden down and send it away as trash, what you're doing essentially is sending next year's butterflies and moths away, because the bulk of them winter in your garden as an egg, a caterpillar, or a chrysalis. And you'll never find that egg. You won't find the caterpillar. You won't find the chrysalis. They're so camouflaged. But just knowing that they're there is a wonderful excuse to be a lazy gardener. So when your neighbors complain and your family doesn't understand, just say that garden is full of life. And that's why you're leaving it standing. And two, by leaving it standing, a lot of the seed heads are going to disperse, and you'll end up with baby native plants that are worth a fortune as you want to expand your gardens.
Awesome. Let's see. Susan Cobb, Pat, for a beginner, do you recommend starting perennials and wildflower from seeds or buying plants?
That is a super question. And I don't have the patience for seeds. So years ago, when I first started gardening with wildlife in mind and wanting to plant native plants, there were this many native plant nurseries, 0. If I wanted a native plant, I had to have a friend who already had it, could divide it and share it with me, or I had to order from a nursery in the Midwest. Today, there are many native plant nurseries in this region, and I have a list of reputable ones on my website that I encourage you to support. It's a struggle to be a native plant nursery because the average nursery is showing pretty stuff in flower that is worthless to wildlife. So that's what most people are buying. They're buying these pretty things that are catching your eye, where the native plant nurseries are, you know, struggling to grow from seed. They're not digging from the wild. They're struggling to grow from seed or cuttings, really important native plants, and they don't look like much. They're not catching your eye, but they're invaluable to wildlife. So I would support native plant nurseries, and I would purchase a plant that's been grown and is already has developed a root system, so that you will end up with an instant garden. You're not waiting for that seed you've planted to, in some cases, 3 years finally become a plant, or 6 years. You know, sometimes it's quite a while before you get a plant. The Turk's Cap lilies in my garden, Chris Clemenson of Clemenson Farms Native Plants, which is no longer, they just sold their nursery this year. She told me it took 6 years before she had a plant from the seeds that she planted. So definitely buy plants. So instant gratification.
You have to support their hard work. 3 years.
Yes, definitely.
Let's see. Lorna Woodbridge. Thank you, Pat. This is Lorna Woodbridge here. We are now in an apartment with a tiny patio in Warren County, New Jersey. We were wondering, what would you recommend for pots to try and support wildlife? We will get a hummingbird feeder and bird feeders for the winter. Is there anything else you can think of that we should include in this very small area? Thank you.
If it's sunny, there are quite a few native plants that can flourish in a pot. And a friend has a garden on his 2nd story deck in a condominium. And he has a lot going on that 2nd story deck. He's planted, I guess it's not a native, but he's planted tropical milkweed. That's an annual. He's attracted monarch caterpillars to it. He's planted parsley and fennel and had the life cycle of black swallowtails happening on his 2nd story deck. There's probably lots of ideas. Right now, I can't really come up with a list of them, but feel free to contact me and I can put my thinking cap on. But experiment with that.
Excuse me, Pat, in 2018, CU Morris River, you had helped us bring Heather home to
Yes.
the Eco Fair.
Yes.
Could you, thinking about urban beekeeping, could you speak a little bit about the possibilities with somebody who might have a balcony or a deck and how they might be able to manage for native bees?
And before you do that, I'm going to remind you about your polls.
Yes. Did you have something in mind, Carla?
Oh, I'm sorry. I was thinking about the providing cavities for native bees in your native wildlife garden, and in urban areas, they've had success with providing the tubes, so
Yes.
that bees like the mason bee or the blueberry mason bee can have their eggs over winter in order to hatch in the early spring of the following year. And I was thinking that maybe for somebody who has a balcony or somebody who has a terrace, that they could use that as to manage for wildlife as well.
Sure. In my own garden, I learned from Heather Holm, when I do the cleanup in the late winter, early spring, after a stretch of warm days when I start to see growth from perennials. Heather Holmes suggested not breaking all the stems off to the ground, but if you have substantial stems, and that's the case with ironweed, Joe Pye weed, some of the sunflowers, those stems, to break them off at about 18 inches high. And then bees that nest in plant stems already have a head start and can utilize those stems that you've left as stem stubble in the garden. So in an urban area, if there is a garden, people can do that. and you can even collect substantial plant stems and hang them from a tree. Cut them about maybe a foot long, bundle them, and hang them from a tree. Heather Holm, in her book, Pollinators of Native Plants, explains how to do this. And that was going to be one of our poll questions, but we got ahead of ourselves, and Marcy's reminding us. When do you, so Marcy, let's ask poll question number 3, I think, because we've kind of gotten into that.
Sure. Okay, and it's good time too, because I don't want to lose too many people.
Okay, Pat, I'm going to ask you a question in the meantime, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Kathleen Spath is asking, do you grow a vegetable garden too? And then there's a lot of other questions. Do you get slugs, bats, owls, and biting mosquitoes or horseshoe flies?
We have it all. I think all
Gotcha.
who are outside, we've got it all going on in the way of biting insects, certainly here in South Jersey. I do not have a vegetable garden. I do have a very tiny limping along vegetable garden where I've planted green beans and 2 pepper plants. But all my other vegetables I get at a local farm stand. Their green beans just are not up to par for me. So I've planted my own green bean patch.
Gotcha. We want to.
And can you see the poll results right now?
Yes, great. So it looks like actually a few people do clean up their garden in fall, but the majority clean it up in late winter and early spring. And that is most wildlife friendly, is to wait until late winter and spring. By cleaning it up in fall, as I shared earlier, you're kind of taking away the butterflies and moths that you've drawn into your garden. So,
Wow.
cool.
Okay. Another question. Should you deadhead bee balm in order to get more blooms from the plant versus not deadheading them?
Bee balm blooms profusely, and when it's a really hot, dry summer like we had when wild bergamot was blooming, which is Monarda fistulosa, it's one of the bee balms. Mine is done before I'd like it to be done. It's like one of the very best nectar plants in my garden. So I did deadhead it this year, but often I don't deadhead most of my plants. I'm too fearful that I might cut off something a caterpillar is on. You know, monarchs wander, monarch caterpillars. And I have found monarch chrysalises on bee balm plants. So I'm fearful that I could, you know, destroy something like that. But this year I did deadhead my wild bergamot and some of my red flowering bee balm, and it will reflower if you do that. It's a great thing to do to encourage more blooms later on.
Okay, awesome. There's a couple questions about fertilizer. Do you fertilize at all? And do fertilizers deter any pollinators?
I don't use chemicals in my garden, so any fertilizing is done naturally. And I do mulch my perennial garden with salt hay, which is not available widely, but it is available here in southern New Jersey. And it is marsh grass, it's Spartina patens, that is cut and baled from the salt marsh, the upper salt marsh. So yes, there are seeds in it, but there are seeds of plants that will never grow in your garden. So it makes a great mulch. It keeps the ground from baking to a hard, you know, crisp packed soil. It keeps the ground moist and not hard packed. It makes it easier for plants to survive, and weeds don't come through it that much. And if they do, they're easy to pull out. So when that salt hay breaks down, I am fertilizing the garden with the broken down salt hay. It enriches the soil, and fallen leaves break down over time, and they will enrich the soil. And I have a compost bin, and I put my compost out. So that is enriching the soil. So I try to do it as naturally as possible. This summer, with it so dry and so hot, I was watering a lot, more than I wanted to, but I didn't want to lose my plants. And the water was not staying in the ground long with our sandy soil. So I am going to put down some mushroom soil in late fall and winter right over top of my garden, all the areas where things are struggling, and that will naturally enrich the soil. You don't want to go too overboard, because a lot of native plants, they like a fairly sterile situation, but too, you want to think about how much you need to water. And if the water is just pouring right through, you want your soil to be a little bit more organic. So if you have a source for mushroom soil, that's a great natural way to fertilize the garden.
Okay, let's see. Do you have any tips on something that's eating tall grasses in someone's garden?
Well, the skippers lay their eggs on grasses, native grasses. So I'm not sure if what's been planted in the garden is a native grass or one of the ornamentals that nurseries sell. A lot of nurseries are selling pampas grass and some of these grasses that are exotic looking and actually quite invasive. So if something is eating those, I don't know what it might be. But if something is eating a native grass that you've planted, like big blue stem or little blue stem, that's probably a good thing. The skippers lay their eggs on our native grasses.
Okay, let's see. Your favorite pollinator plant for summer and fall?
All of them.
All of them, okay.
Yeah. Perennials, native perennials have a finite blooming period. So last night during the How to Spot Butterfly program, we talked about butterfly bush. And a lot of people like that because it blooms forever. It blooms until the frost. But it is native to China. So I have taken all of mine out, and instead I have native perennials, because native perennials are not only providing nectar, but many of them are also caterpillar plants for butterflies and moths. They're very important caterpillar plants. But your native perennials don't bloom for 3 months at a time. Like one plant will not bloom for 3 straight months. It blooms for a 2 or 3 week period, maybe at the most a month. So you want to plant a variety of different native perennials so that you always have something in bloom, so that there's always nectar for pollinators. So I love them all because it's this changing show out there. That's why the virtual tour on July 2nd, it's one of my favorite times of year. The bee balm, the red bee balm was in full bloom. The Carl honeysuckle was vibrant. The Culver's root was gorgeous. But so many other things hadn't yet bloomed. And then when they bloom, they're my favorites. And then when they're done and something else blooms, they're my favorites. So I embrace it all, and it's kind of fun to be learning what will fill in holes, quiet parts of your garden with showy color and nectar. And on my website, the Gardening for Pollinators post has a link to a handout about pollinators with a lot of chocolate cakes that bloom month by month. So that'll really be helpful to people if you're new to figuring out what to plant so that you have nectar blooming from spring through late fall when the frost comes.
Okay. Now it looks like we're getting low on time, so I'll ask some of the quicker ones.
Okay.
Should mountain mint be pruned? Mine are leggy.
Mountain mint, should it be pruned? Mine grew low this year and I don't know why. Normally it's very tall. And mine is just starting to bloom right now and kind of coming into full flower. I have never given that a haircut. I just, if it's tall, it's tall. If it's growing short, it's growing short. You could experiment with it and cut some of it so it'll bloom lower and see what you think. But what you do sometimes when you give plants a haircut, you delay the bloom to the point where, you know, you're not getting the nectar when you want to get the nectar.
Okay. Let's see. Any native plants that do well in containers that can be left out on a deck in the winter?
I'd have to put my thinking cap on there because I've not had to garden with containers. So if that person could maybe email me that question where I could think more about it offhand. A lot of perennials have deep tap roots and they're not going to be happy in a container.
Tony Clock is going in the chat and he says sedum.
Oh, great point, Tony. Thank you. Sedum, yes. That is a native plant and I've had some in a concrete container for 40 years.
Sedum's so beautiful too.
Let's
see. I planted purple coneflower a few times and they don't take off and spread. I even planted a new one in bloom, watered it, planted, and now it looks half dead. What can I do?
So purple coneflower, the rabbits like it. So sometimes when it's not doing very well, it could be because Mama Bunny and her babies she's shown the babies, here is the purple coneflower patch. So I don't know, you might put a little chicken wire fence around it and see if it does better. One friend has a luscious stand of it and she mulches her garden bed heavily with all of the neighbors' leaves. So I guess it really likes that. So this friend goes around to the neighbors and collects all their bags of leaves and their trash cans of leaves, and they all scratch their head as she marches back to her house with their leaves. But her coneflowers are lovely.
Awesome. Marcy, how are we doing? How many more questions do you think I can go through here?
There's 10 more, Pat. Is that good for you?
It's good for me if it's good for you.
Okay, awesome. Let's see it. Here's a question. Who is the helper and mower in your video?
I'm sorry, who is what?
The garden helper and lawn mower.
Oh, in our yard?
Yes.
My husband does the mowing.
Oh.
His gardening help is limited to pointing. This needs to be done, that needs to be done. But you're looking at the gardener. I don't really have a garden helper.
Gotcha. So two of you, two-man
Yes.
show, let's say. Do you ever feed the birds with store-purchased bird seed, or do you rely only on the wildlife garden as a food source?
We definitely have an active bird feeder station. We put sunflower hearts out year-round, not that many in the summer months because there's so much natural food, but the goldfinches still come to them in the summer. And we have lots of birds coming to the sunflower hearts in the winter months. And we sprinkle millet seed on the ground for the sparrows. And the sparrows also feed on a lot of seeds that fall from the garden. Many birds are in the garden scratching around, feeding on seeds that have fallen from the garden. So we complement all the natural seeds with active bird feeding stations. And of course we have hummingbird feeders in the months that hummingbirds are here.
Okay, and then speaking of hummingbirds, here's a very specific question. A grandson is watching with a viewer and wants to know if you've ever seen a praying mantis eat a hummingbird. Or I guess vice versa, maybe.
Yeah, I have not seen a praying mantis eat a hummingbird, but I have seen photographs of it. It does happen, especially out west where there's so many different hummingbirds, and we think we have a lot. We have the ruby-throated hummingbird, but out west there's 13 species, and a feeder can have just a blizzard of activity. And I've seen photographs of praying mantises on a hummingbird feeder with a hummingbird. It does happen.
Oh, wow. Yeah, right?
And it's probably not a native praying mantis. It's probably the Chinese mantis.
Oh, okay.
That will also eat our native mantis, the Carolina mantis.
Oh, wow. I'm learning something new. Let's see. Do wildlife ponds do better in sun or shade?
Wildlife ponds definitely should be situated in a sunny spot, not under a tree, because if under a tree, they will fill up with fallen leaves. So it becomes a hassle. And with the fallen leaves, you end up with a lot of algae problems. So I recommend that people put their wildlife pond in an open sunny spot. And the dragonflies like that as well. They're in that open sunny spot doing their egg laying.
Okay. Does great blue lobelia attract?
Yes, great blue lobelia is a full nectar plant for hummingbirds, and some butterflies as well will come into it, like the cloudless sulfurs and some of the swallowtails.
Okay. Here's a question that we talked about a lot yesterday. Today on my elderberry bush, I found something that looked like a gypsy moth web. Do you know what it might have been? I cut it off.
Right now, any sort of a web is probably the fall webworm. Gypsy moths do not make a web, so it's not gypsy moths. It's probably fall webworms, which are native, and the caterpillars are eaten by some of the birds. So they're unsightly, but they're not really that harmful.
Okay. I'm hesitant to remove my non-natives as they are mature. Planted them prior to having any native knowledge. Some are mature non-native holly. My dog loves our weeping cherry tree as a den. What is a good replacement?
I have a list of trees, shrubs, and vines that are native that are most beneficial to birds. And I'd be happy to share that with the person who asked the question. And you can choose from that list based on just how many birds benefit from each of our native trees and shrubs, and then couple it with Doug Tallamy's list of the most important trees and shrubs that butterflies and moths lay their eggs on. And yeah, a lot of us have learned about native plants over time, and there are things that we planted or that were already on our properties that we now realize are not very beneficial. In fact, it's like kind of having a plastic plant there as far as wildlife is concerned. So I wouldn't recommend taking everything down, but as you learn more about native plants and just how important they are, maybe one by one start eliminating some of those as you need room to plant some of the things you'd like to add to your landscape. And I'm at that point now. Just the last couple of years, I dug out some lilacs that were 100 years old. We live in an old farmhouse, and those lilacs were here when we bought the property, but I wanted a common 9-bark, a beautiful native shrub in the rose family, and I wanted a another native tree, and I had to dig these lilacs out. It took me 2 full years in the ungodly heat to do.
Oh my goodness.
But finally, the last bit of root, I asked a muscle-bound friend to help me, and we got them out, and I don't miss them. And I
Oh
love
my goodness.
the new things that I planted.
Final question, and this one I'm really interested in. James Wilson, is crepe myrtle good for anything?
Good question. Crepe myrtle is very popular, very beautiful, but sit and watch it, and you will not find a single thing coming to it. Although I was at a lecture on native plants when one of the speakers raved about it and had a photograph of a honeybee, a European honeybee, which is not native, at the crepe myrtle. And they're not a wildlife plant. They kind of just take up space. They might as well be plastic. They're really not benefiting wildlife. Nothing can lay their eggs on them. And they're commonly sold. They're commonly recommended. There's so many better choices than crepe myrtle. So that'd be a good example of if your yard has 4 or 5 crepe myrtles, maybe remove one and plant a native tree instead, and you'll be hooked in no time when you see so much happening in that native tree compared to the crepe myrtles.
One last question that just popped in there. How long have you been gardening?
I've been gardening forever. We've been in our property since 1977. And I started vegetable gardening, but we also let things come up that were native, like the side backyard where we had the hackberry come up and the American holly. And probably soon after we moved in, I started really gardening with natives with a vengeance. I planted a tulip tree that was 1 foot high that now towers over the house. And I planted it because I love tiger swallowtails, and they lay their eggs on tulip trees. But initially it was very hard. It was hard to find the plants. So everyone today is very, very fortunate because there are so many native plant nurseries now, and knowledgeable people that are running those nurseries that are selling you plants that are not treated with neonicotinoids, which are systemic insecticides, which are used in your average nursery, so that anything that might lay an egg on that plant, when the egg hatches, the caterpillar will feed on the plant and die. So you want a knowledgeable native plant nursery to be the source of your plants, so that your wildlife plants aren't going to be killing agents. They're going to be, friendly plants that wildlife can benefit from. So you're all very lucky. There's so many books today. Heather Holmes' books all about native bees and native pollinators, Doug Tallamy's books. We're very fortunate today to have so much terrific knowledge out there to help guide us.
Well, Pat, that was so great again.
Thank you, Sarah.
Enjoyed having you.
Thank you, Megan, for that terrific film of the garden on July 2nd. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Megan. I'm just going to share your
Good job, Megan.
email.
Thank
Yes, excellent job. And yes, thank you, Pat. It's wonderful again. And Sarah, you're so good with the questions. And I just want to leave this up here for a minute. I have shared your website and I have shared your email in the chat.
Great.
As well as Monarch Watch again. And of course, some things bringing people back to WheatonArts too. So is there any other questions before I move on?
Looks like we finished out all the questions. So we're good.
Also,
Super.
I would like to, from CU Morris River, I'd like to thank everyone for coming out tonight. And I would also like to thank you for your interest and curiosity in wildlife gardening. And if you need any help with getting started, Pat's website is fantastic. And should you have any questions, please feel free to email us at info@cumorrisriver.org. We host a lot of different stewardship-oriented workshops, and we would love to not only get you out into nature, but also help you find your way in stewardship. So thank you for attending, everyone.
I second that. Thank you for your interest in wildlife gardening.
Yay, everyone.
And also Sarah's information is here, slacy@WheatonArts.org. She's a special events coordinator at WheatonArts, and I'm sure that you'll want to be in touch with her maybe next year, but well, this is a great time to get to know Sarah. She, as I said, she came to us in February, and this is a very intimate way to get to know you. So this is the advantage of the situation as well. So again, I'm just going to remind everybody one more time of 3 things. First, that you can enter RUGA to find those wild clay pots from South Jersey clay, and that you can get the Busy Bee New Jersey honey throughout the weekend, and 15% off the cart, as well as your free eco bag. And we'd also love to hear from you about any programs that you can think of and what you thought of the programs this week. I'm getting some emails and I'm responding to them as soon as I can. If you head back to the original virtual eco week on our webpage, also in the chat, then you will see the recordings of most of the programs this week. And again, I thank you, Pat. It's been a real pleasure to spend these 2 evenings with you and work with all of you, Carla and Megan and Sarah, to create this these 2 evenings presentation. Everybody,
Thank you, Marcy, and thank you, WheatonArts, for everything that you've done to help us bring Pat to your audience and our audience as well. I'd also like to let everybody know that tomorrow morning, CU Morris River's naturalist Tony Clock, he's also a trustee of ours, will be leading a walk in Millville. You can meet him just off of Brandrift Avenue at Waltman Park. And he is a fantastic naturalist, and he can build very easily on what Pat has taught. He sits on he's part of our World Series of Birding team. He's very knowledgeable about plants, and he has a fantastic wildlife garden on the Bay Shore that Shirley will also be highlighting on our September butterfly walk. So I hope that you might join him tomorrow, and if not, you should come on our butterflies galore on the Bay Shore in September. So join our email list, or just email us, and we would love to get you out.
And that is also in the chat. And if you didn't, your website and your join, renew, and donate page. So if you didn't get that, email me or Carla, whoever's email you get, you can email and we will promise to share. Good night all, and thank you again.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you very much.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. A lot of fun.